games you played were never fun. You'd say you'd stay, but then you'd run. Giving you what you're begging for, giving you what you say I need. I don't want any settled scores, I just want you to set me free. Giving you what you're begging for, giving you what you say I need. Say I need. I'm not afraid anymore. What makes you sure you're all I need? Forget about it. When you walk out the door and leave me torn, you're teaching me to live without it. I'm so bored. I'm so bored.
You know, maybe if there is anybody who is going to write the definitive song about being bored and about boredom, it would be Billie Eilish and possibly her brother Phineas. And this could be it. You could be hearing it now for the first time. We're going to talk about boredom today. We're going to talk about how we have thought about it across the ages. We'll do that a little bit more in the second segment. We're going to talk about what happens when movies intentionally, in the name of so-called slow cinema, begin extracting some of their more exciting possibilities and dwelling on other possibilities. But right at the beginning, we're just going to talk about boredom and how we think about it. It's something that we've been aware of as a species for a really long time. We seem to be thinking about it in a slightly different way. Before I bring our guest aboard here, we sent our intern, Katie Service, up and down Farmington Avenue and nearby, and asked people if they were ever bored. And if so, when? Let's see what they said. A1, please.
Are you ever bored? And if so, when?
Haven't been bored in, I think, in 10 years. I'm a new homeowner since like about 3 years ago, and I'm also lately taken up some music production. So if I'm not doing school stuff, I'm making music or playing with my dogs.
Actually, I don't find myself to be bored. Yeah.
I'm never bored. No, I always find myself doing something that I enjoy or love to do. And I really enjoy like alone time. So, no, not bored ever, really.
Joining us now is James Dankert, professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Waterloo. He's the co-author of Out of My Skull, The Psychology of Boredom. James Dankert, welcome aboard. And, sorry, I said bored. Welcome aboard. And how true do those comments from the street ring? These are people claiming they're never bored. There are philosophers like Pascal and Schopenhauer and maybe even Kierkegaard who would say, oh, no, it's part of the human condition. You're bored sometimes. Where are you on this right now?
I'd agree with them that it is part of the human condition. And I think when people say I'm never bored, what they're really saying is that, when boredom strikes, I'm pretty quick and adept at dealing with it. So the signal doesn't last very long for them. And that's true of a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that you don't experience it. You don't experience that moment that sort of says, whatever I'm doing now isn't working and I've got to find something better to do. It's just the people you found on the street and that small sample seem to be pretty good at that.
So, boredom isn't really just one thing, and there's lots of ways to divide and then subdivide it. But one meaningful dichotomy for you is the difference between state boredom and trait boredom. So spell that out for us.
Yeah, so when we talk about state boredom, we're really talking about in-the-moment feelings of boredom. So those situations where you may be constrained, you're in line at something, waiting for something to happen in line at the DMV, God forbid, and there's nothing you can do, no way to control it, and you're bored. And that's that signal that what you're doing now isn't particularly meaningful, isn't particularly purposeful to you, and so you feel like you're a little bit bored. And that's the thing that I think that everybody experiences from time to time in their life, but it doesn't have to last very long. When we talk about trait boredom, these are individuals for whom the experience of boredom is much more frequent. When they do experience boredom, it's intense, so they really dislike the experience quite a lot. And there's a third factor to that people who are prone to boredom also feel like their lives just lack a lot of meaning. And, you heard in one of the people you talked to on the street there, they weren't bored because they were focusing on their new house and focusing on their music production and they had things to do, So those are people who have found meaning in their lives. But the people who we see that are chronically bored lack that sense of meaning.
So there has been over time, particularly in kind of the modern age, particularly in the United States, a certain amount of boredom shaming that goes on, and it takes the form of one specific aphorism. Let's hear a little clip from the series Mad Men. You're going to hear Betty Draper talking to her son. This goes very quickly, but A2, please.
What are you doing?
I'm bored.
Go bang your head against the wall.
Mom.
Only boring people are bored.
James, you've doubtless heard this a million times. It doesn't seem quite right, even based on what we've said so far, but react to it.
Yeah, so I actually had our librarian here track down that phrase. Where did it come from? Who originated it? It's from a Charles Bukowski story, in fact, where he says only boring people get bored. And it is a moral judgment. It's this moralizing that sort of says, you should be better. You should go out and find something in the world that matters to you. And I really think that the people who say that are responding from a place where they don't struggle with boredom, and they never have struggled with boredom. And so for them, it seems like a very easy and simple thing to do, to just find something and do something. But it's the chronically bored people who that is precisely their struggle. They struggle to launch into action. And I don't know that that's a moral failing. I think there are a lot of different reasons why that might be the case, but I don't think it's from any kind of moral ineptitude.
James, at the moment, it seems as though millennials, Gen Z, probably Generation Alpha, they're having a moment of temperature taking, I think, about this whole thing because, in fact, so I'm 71 years old. I remember what it was like to... This isn't like having fought in World War I, but I remember what it was like to wait in a motor vehicles line with no phone. And, maybe you could sort of bring a book and try to read it standing up. But I've experienced both the joy of having something that I can look at when I'm bored, but I've also experienced the opposite of not having it. They seem to be a little worried about this right now. You're seeing things like do-nothing challenges on TikTok, where members of those generations attempt to do nothing for a really long time, including not looking at their phones. There's even this rather bizarre use of the term raw dogging to now refer to like a 6-hour plane flight where you don't have anything to entertain yourself. You do that intentionally, I guess, to see where that goes. What do you make of all of that? Is that maybe a different kind of boredom shaming?
I'm not sure if I think it's a different kind of boredom shaming. I think it's actually far less related to boredom than it seems from the outset. And this is coming from someone who's taken a lot of long-haul flights, and I can't imagine anything more inane or ridiculous than trying to raw dog that by looking only at the flight path image on that screen. What I think it's actually coming from is a desire not to be more bored, but to disconnect. I think that there are lots of anxieties that particularly young people are facing. What does my future look like? What kind of employment am I going to be able to get? What state is the environment going to be in? Without getting too deep into the weeds, what's the state of the politics of the world that I live in at the moment? Things are anxious, things are tense, right? And so I think what young people who are engaging this do nothing sort of challenge are really saying is that they want to disconnect from that stress, from that anxiety. And I think that's perfectly fine. But what we know about boredom is that chronic experiences of boredom are stressful. They're going to lead to higher rates of depression and anxiety. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to me to invite more boredom into your life intentionally. It makes much more sense to find meaningful ways to respond well to your boredom.
That kind of turns up in a different way and I'm going to ask about this, the 2014 study. There were actually, I think, 9 different studies done there, but the only one that anybody talks about, these are the Timothy Wilson studies, is the one that's the least boring, I guess, and that's the one that involved people giving themselves electric shocks. Explain that and then say what you make of that.
Yeah, so it's a great study, actually, but they put people in a room for 15 minutes with nothing but their thoughts. So these are undergraduate students. Typically, they'd take away their phones, their backpacks. The walls had nothing on them that you could look at or read. And I think the important thing to point out is that in many of their studies, about 1/3 of the people who did this actually found it quite enjoyable because I think they were able to disconnect and defrag for a bit. 1/3 of the people who did it were ambivalent, and then 1/3 hated it. And then, as you say, in their final experiment, they gave people an option. You could be in this room for 15 minutes with nothing but your thoughts, or you could self-administer an electric shock. And many people, more men than women, chose to self-administer these electric shocks. One guy famously shocked himself 196 times in 15 minutes. And what that says to me is that there's a quote from Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, that sort of says, the great end of life is not thought, but action, right? And then so we are sort of built to be doing. We're built to be acting in and on the world. We're not built to be sitting around navel gazing. That work was followed up by a number of other people, sort of showing that this desire to do something is really prominent when you're bored. So, in some studies, they make people feel sad or they make them feel bored. You do more electric shocks to yourself when you're bored than when you're sad. And so it really does suggest that boredom is this kind of push to action.
Yeah, and there is that idea, and it exists within the realm of creativity too. That sometimes the mind is almost like this horse that you're keeping at the gate for a really, really long time in a state for the mind of boredom, and then when you finally let the horse out on the track, the horse runs faster. And there was one study that was done where some people were given very boring tasks, copying numbers from a phone book, and then there was a control group that didn't have to do anything like that. But when they were asked to generate as many uses as they could for a pair of plastic cups, the people who'd had the really boring job had a lot more interesting and different ideas, just more of a plenitude anyway of ideas than the people in the control group, which I think maybe kind of gets to what you're saying, too, that we're primed to do stuff. So if we're deprived of the ability to do that, we're just all the more eager to do it when we get the chance.
Yeah, I think creativity is a really great outlet for squashing your boredom. But I do think it's important to sort of get the association right. I don't think there's much chance that boredom will make you creative. I think boredom's just opening the door for you to exert your creative juices if you've had that practice before, right? So in that study, what it actually turned out was that the people who were daydreaming more when they were doing the boring task, they were the ones that came up with more creative uses. So you don't know from that whether or not it's boredom or daydreaming that leads to creativity. And I think I know where I'd fall. I think that opening your mind up to other possibilities, which is classically what you're doing when you're daydreaming or mind wandering, is much more likely to lead to creative solutions than is the sort of ruminative, negative feeling of being bored. And in fact, we tried to replicate that study. We published this a couple of years ago and failed. We couldn't, we made people bored, and they were less creative when we made them bored on that same task. So it's just boredom won't give you sort of creative skills that you don't already have. Creative skills that you do already have will do a great job squashing your boredom.
So I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation, which for all I know is a very real situation for you, or may become a very real situation for you. One of the areas where this whole subject is going to have a certain kind of urgency, if that's the right word, is when we start doing really long distance space travel, when we start going to Mars. And they've started to do simulations, the so-called high seas, Hawaii space exploration analog and simulation, where they keep people in an environment that resembles what it would be like, I think, on a really long space flight. Boredom, obviously, would maybe be one's enemy in that situation, or maybe a force that could be channeled in a different way. I don't know if they bring you in as a consultant, James. Off the top of your head, what are you going to tell them?
Well, I'm going to tell them to look at the work that's already been done with polar expeditions, going to the Arctic or the Antarctic. This is, as you say, it's very similar sort of constrained environments. You can't just walk out your front door and do anything you like, and very extreme environments. And so we have some data that suggests that boredom will arise in those things. What's the thing that's at stake there? Your autonomy, because you can't just leave your front door and do whatever you like. And, for things like space missions, there's a lot of other tasks that central control is going to be getting you to do that, maybe you don't feel like you have choice over. So I would suggest anything that can promote that sense of autonomy and choice might be an important thing to consider in these long haul kind of missions.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this too, just in the sense of the classical world, where when we think of Roman legionaries, we think of them, in battle, but obviously they weren't battling all the time. That would have been happening just in small spurts, and clearly there's just an awful lot of things that they were forced to do, and they were hoping that latrine duty would not be one of them. But there was just stuff, the maintenance of equipment and stuff like that, and everything like that. But the problem, I think, for them was if you gave them free time, it was kind of drinking and whoring and gaming, which obviously you don't want to on a space mission. So that's also an interesting thing, is that if people are bored, we have this default or latent idea that they will gravitate into vice. I don't know how realistic that is, though.
I don't know that, yeah. So we certainly know that people who are chronically bored will engage in what you might call sort of maladaptive responses to the boredom. We know people who are chronically bored have higher rates of drug and alcohol use, higher rates of problem gambling. We're starting to pay attention, people like John Alhai and his colleagues are starting to pay attention to higher boredom and problematic smartphone use, which is essentially sort of addictive-like behaviors with your smartphone and social media. What's common across those things? What's common across a slot machine, your smartphone and social media, and drinking and whoring if you're a Roman legionnaire? These are easy and convenient activities to occupy your mind. They may not be super adaptive or meaningful, or they may not be ultimately responding well to the boredom signal because they're not fully using your brain's resources in good ways, but they are quick, they are easy and convenient, and so they're sort of useful ways to eliminate boredom, even if they have those negative outcomes.
All right, we have to stop there, although I would like to talk to you a lot longer, James Dankert. You've gotten us off to a wonderful start. Professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Waterloo. He's co-author of Out of My Skull, The Psychology of Boredom. We'll take a quick break, and we will be back.
For supper now, day's been hard and I'm so tired I feel like eating now. Smell the kitchen now, hear the maid whistle a tune, my thoughts are fleeting now. Still I dream a bit of that happy day when
That's Brian Wilson, feeling kind of bored. But we're going to talk a little bit about this in a more historical context and in a more kind of pervasively cultural context now with Peter Toohey, professor of classics at the University of Calgary and author of books including Boredom, A Lively History. Mary Mann is the college archivist at the Cooper Union and the author of Yawn, Adventures in Boredom. So, Peter, one of the things that I encountered in getting ready for today's show was the work of the Norwegian philosopher Lars Svensson, who wrote A Philosophy of Boredom in 2005. And he makes the argument, with which I think you are going to disagree, that boredom wasn't really, as he says, thematized until the Romantic period. That obviously monks were bored and the nobility could probably manage to get bored, but there really wasn't a lot of room for anybody else to think of themselves in that particular way until there was a little bit more, I don't know, breathing room to realize that that one was bored. I don't know. How well does that argument hold up for you?
Not quite so well. I mean, the Greeks and Romans speak about boredom. Not so much. It comes in later in the literature when they take an interest in these sorts of things. But there's references to it. There's words for it and so on. People were being bored, whether it's institutionalized the way that you could say it does post whatever it was in 1854 with Charles Dickens, with the word starting to appear. Who knows? But it sometimes feels like that with Seneca. The other thing to say to that, the trouble is words are a trap for the mind. Here I'm quoting it's a title from a psychologist's article dealing with other matters, but they really are. That there's lots of words for boredom. In my family, larger family, they talk about being fed up, and it doesn't make much sense until you know what's being said. It means they're bored. So there's a string of words for boredom.
Yes, and certainly the Stoics were aware of boredom, and Seneca would have said, and did say, I think, get out there and do something. Contribute something to the world that you're living in. Be an active and engaged citizen if what you're feeling is something like boredom. Am I doing an okay job with Seneca? How's my Seneca impersonation?
It's probably better than mine, but yeah, but he refers to it as a seasickness, and that one comes on. Seneca, I often feel with Seneca, he's sort of sharper at observing than legislating sometimes. He really was, but they're getting good at that in this period. I think it's why I don't think I've ever been able to sell the definition of boredom as taking in disgust, but I say that because of Seneca and because of some of the books I read. The other thing with Romans, or what changes it a lot, is life expectancy for a man's about 26 on average. There's not a lot of time to get married, because a Roman comes of age about 25. Not a lot of time to get married. And as for boredom, where do you fit it in?
Right. There's no time for boredom. Yeah. So Mary, Peter said there's a lot of words for boredom in antiquity. My favorite one that I don't yet know how to pronounce, but you're going to fix that, is either acedia or acedia or acedia or something like that. But we have to go back to the Desert Fathers in Egypt. These would be sort of, well, actually, I'll let you set the scene here, but this is sort of the beginning of Christian monasticism, and they are dealing with something that they also refer to as the noonday demon, that A word. So tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I'll help you pronounce it, because I feel like acedia is what I would say.
That's how I would go that way too. Yeah.
Yeah. They're 4th century monks, and that's a time when a lot of these like monotheistic religions are sort of coming into themselves. I mean, Judaism obviously is before that, but there's all these new ways of thinking about people as separate from and related to the world. And they got so bored. Oh my God. They secluded themselves so that they could just be one with their spirituality. And one of their descriptions, one of the guys described it as such lassitude of body and a craving for food as one might feel after hard toil. Finally, one gazes anxiously here and there and sighs that no brother of any description is to be seen approaching. One is forever in and out of one's cell. Like, it is just like a poor college student in the library, just like, is anybody around to talk to? Should I go get the vending machine? This is driving me crazy.
Yeah, they did.
I think it's a beautiful description.
Yeah, the Desert Fathers did not have vending machines. I think that's been established historically. Yeah, I don't know if it's the same brother, but Evagrius Ponticus says the demon of acedia, which is also called the noonday demon, is the most burdensome of all the demons. It besets the monk at about the 4th hour of the morning, that would be 10 a.m., encircling his soul until about the 8th, that would be 2 p.m., and it makes the sun seem to slow down and stop moving, so that the day appears to be 50 hours long, and it goes on in some length. So, Mary, they really are talking about, I mean, that whole thing about the sun, that really does sound like boredom, maybe by a different name.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I agree with Peter that there's so many different words for this thing, and it's really a feeling that deserves a lot more than one word usually. Mm-hmm. And what they're talking about, that is what it feels like to me, boredom.
Yeah. And there, Peter, there are a lot of different words, and one that we haven't used so far on the show is ennui. To me, ennui, it differs a little bit in the sense that it feels like a condition over which we have even less control. In other words, I have a pretty stimulating job, and I have to do a radio show a whole bunch of times every week, and I have to learn a bunch of stuff for it. And so it's a pretty stimulating life. I don't feel bored a lot of the time, but I'm aware of a condition that settles over me sometimes that makes me feel bored by everything. In other words, I look at things I would ordinarily find stimulating, and I don't find them stimulating. I'm just bored irreparably for a while anyway. And to me, it's sort of different from any of the kinds of boredom we talked about so far on the show. This idea that it might be just something so external that you can't fight your way through it. I don't know. Am I making any sense at all?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, those monks in the desert, I mean, it's a dreadful life. I mean, they live on their own. They don't speak. One of them managed to get his diet down to leaves of lettuce, all in the pursuit of holiness. And as you could imagine, his skin started to peel off shortly thereafter. Yes, it can be externally forced on in the way you're talking about. I mean, the sort of people that James is referring to, it's often you feel it's a lot more internal. The notion of ennui, we use it even differently to the French, I suspect, because they can use it. I've got some troubles. J'ai des ennuis or something like that. I've heard it said that way on movies, not in person. But yes, circumstances control it for sure.
And Peter, while we're on this, and maybe while we're on the French, let me just mention Flaubert. But just generally speaking, for creative people, boredom can be a very interesting state. Flaubert found writing to be very boring. But then he also wrote Emma Bovary as a character who was very bored in a way that led to her demise, to her tragedy. And I know you've looked a lot about the fine arts, the visual arts. It seems as though boredom is, in fact, a subject which artists, whether they're literary artists or whether they paint or do something else, are drawn to, maybe partly because sometimes being a creative person involves enduring long stretches of boredom, but also because the human condition does as well. But say a little bit more about how you see that, Peter.
It could be with writers. It's hard to write a decent book about boredom, that's for sure. It suffers with the same illness. There's not much art been painted on boredom, really. It's not that I know of. What would I know? I'm just a teacher of classics. But even so, someone like Degas, for half of the time, the half when he's not painting women in the bath and ballerinas, is interested in quite a string of emotions. And he's an impressionist, so he tries to paint what he sees. You do see boredom for sure in Degas, but you don't get a touch of it in, as far as I can tell, maybe one example from somebody like Matisse. It just doesn't appear. Yet Matisse is full of people waiting, and is waiting the same as boredom? Can be, but not necessarily. I think they're interested in all right, but the medium controls what you can do. If you're painting abstract art, it's a fair stretch to say you can paint any emotion. You've got to have people in it, or at least animals, a creature that can feel the emotion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I'm sorry for going at such high speeds here, but Mary, I want to just shift gears a little bit just because I know that you've written about this. There's an expression that people often throw around, that I throw around, we're going to give you the cook's tour of such and such a thing. And until I read your piece, I didn't actually know what that meant. I mean, I knew that there was something called a cook's tour. This refers to Thomas Cook, maybe the founder of tourism as we know it, and someone who I think saw travel, which many people find boring, as an antidote to a more domestic kind of boredom. But say a little bit about how you perceive all that.
Yeah, Thomas Cook has been called the father of modern tourism by various folks. I think there's still a Cook's Travel Company. I used to work at a travel company, and they talked about Thomas Cook a lot. So he's still present with us in a lot of ways. And by modern tourism, it sort of means like travel for travel's sake. when he started out planning these package trips, which was like you pay him a certain amount of money and he organizes, the travel and the food and all that stuff. At that time, the people in England where he started those trips were most likely not leaving their village really ever in their life. And train travel was brand new. So it was sort of a new idea that you could go anywhere without having to like have a horse, have a carriage, have all this stuff that could get you there, and have it affordable. So he had this idea at a really convenient time to have it because of train travel. But he was also a teetotaler and really believed in that as a way of living for everybody. And he thought that travel would help people not drink, because they wouldn't be bored, and so they wouldn't have the impetus to drink.
Yeah.
He believed that people drank alcohol to escape the dull round of everyday life, is how he put it.
Yeah, that isn't really borne out, I think, by most people's travel experiences. But I think it also kind of he ignores the fact that there are a lot of people, I'm not one of them, who find travel to be fundamentally boring, that you are no longer in control of your own schedule, that you don't necessarily know where you want to go, where you spend a lot of time walking around looking at stuff. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't enjoy looking at stuff, you're going to find that boring as well.
Well, the novelty is worn off for us, right? Like you go into an airplane and every seat has a TV on it because we don't think it's crazy that we're up in the sky anymore. We're just like, where's the Wi-Fi?
Oh yeah, no, and so another point that you make that's a very interesting one is, and she wouldn't be the only person to have this reaction, but for Jamaica Kincaid, who I think is from Antigua, which is confusing because her name is Jamaica, but she sees this a little bit differently. That where she lives is a place. If where one lives is a place where people go to escape their boredom, there's sort of an interesting bargain being struck there. Say a little bit about how that goes for her.
Yeah, I think Aruba is where she's from.
Okay.
She writes in one of her books, which the name of it just escaped me. Oh, A Small Place, I think. She says locals who can't afford to travel often hate tourists because they envy your ability to leave your own banality and boredom. They envy your ability to turn their banality and boredom into a source of pleasure for yourself. And I think a sort of a simple takeaway from that is that when you have freedom to go see new places, it's probably the freedom that is being envied. But also watching people look at things that have become dull to you and seeing them seeing it with fresh eyes doesn't necessarily make you see that thing differently. It might just make you fed up with your inability to go see new things. Is that too convoluted?
No, it's not too convoluted. I do think that ultimately travel itself, I mean, I like to travel, as I said, but there is, I think, I think Don DeLillo, the novelist, sums it up really well in the novel White Noise, where he talks about this tourist attraction called the most photographed barn in America. He writes, "We drove 22 miles into the country around Farmington. There were meadows and apple orchards. White fences trailed through the rolling fields. Soon the signs started appearing. The most photographed barn in America. We counted 5 signs before we reached the site. There were 40 cars and a tour bus in the makeshift lot. We walked along a cow path to the slightly elevated spot set aside for viewing and photographing." And this goes on. And at one point, somebody says, nobody sees the barn. Once they've seen the signs about the barn, it becomes impossible to see the barn. But, there's something, Mary, so scripted about travel at times in that way that it becomes the opposite of the kind of novelty and spontaneity and becomes more like one of, Peter's Roman legionnaires talking about long enforced marches.
Yeah, I mean, certainly now, when Thomas Cook was having this idea, there was no internet, there was no Instagram. You couldn't see a million pictures of a place before you went there. I mean, those are obvious things to say. Of course, there wasn't internet, but I think it's easy to say, but hard to actually put yourself in that place and think about what it would have been like to just not know anything about a place before you got there, not having seen anything about it. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah. So, Peter, I think there's a segue that I can make from there to David Foster Wallace. So David Foster Wallace, among writers, I think it was very consciously interested in boredom. And his final unfinished novel, The Pale King, appears to have been an effort to write a fairly boring novel that was also interesting. I think somebody said about Flaubert that he was the first person to write novels about boring characters who were very interesting, boring characters who don't bore us. And it seems as though David Foster Wallace wanted to carry that a little bit further and to examine boredom and to make us interested in boredom. But I don't know, can you do anything to kind of palpate that contradiction of being interested in boredom and a great novelist wanting to do something with that?
I couldn't. I found that novel a bit of a chore. I just feel he didn't quite succeed. I seldom say it because it's sort of like swearing in church, but it's. I didn't like it too much. There's a whole lot of other things you could say about Emma Bovary other than that she's boring. She's not.
She's bored. She's bored rather than boring, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You've defeated me with
Well, I didn't mean to. And Peter, so before we run out of time here, you mentioned waiting earlier. This is something that you've gone on to write about. And I think for a lot of us, I heard a comedian talking on a podcast one day about how he was in a long line without his phone, and he realized that he'd forgotten how to wait. He'd become so accustomed to just turning to his phone in a long line that he'd forgotten whatever skills exist in waiting in a more sort of naked circumstance. Say a little bit about the connection between waiting and boredom.
I guess waiting is it's an unresolved expectation. And as soon as you describe it that way, you could be talking about boredom, couldn't you? Boredom is that feeling of this is Eastwood, James Dankett's colleague said earlier on, it's a feeling of wanting to do something but not being able to do it. And that was an early definition he used. But that fits with waiting. But of course, waiting's not always like that. As with most emotions, there's a good and a bad side. Anger can be useful and a good thing, and it can be an extremely bad thing. Waiting can be painful, but it can be good. If you want to play with children, you're going to have to do a whole lot of waiting. Like this I learned particularly from my grandchildren. They'll want to play excruciating games, and if you want to be with them and enjoy the time, you sort of have to put yourself into it and put up with some of the aspects of waiting. You wait for your friends, you may get impatient, but you're glad when they come. So waiting can be good in that regard, can't it? But
it can. Yeah, that's an excellent point. We're going to have to stop there, but Peter Toohey, a professor of classics at University of Calgary, author of books including Boredom, A Lively History, Merry Men, college archivist at the Cooper Union, and the author of Yawn, Adventures in Boredom. We are going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to go to the world of cinema.
Well, that night passed in a blaze of glory with the Countess and the car both mine. And each day passes with the same old story, but the Countess has a brand new line. Yet still at night I am haunted by the bright and distant memory of the day I lost the light, moving through the night, running from the Grand Ennui, running from the Grand Ennui.
Our technical producer today is Dylan Reyes, the maestro. Thanks also to Katie Service, one of our wonderful interns right now, who went out and gathered the voices from the streets. Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions has made this particular episode possible, so thanks to her or them or it or whatever that entity actually is. We're going to end by talking about movies, and we're going to do so with my long-time friend, I mean, of many decades, David Edelstein, America's greatest living film critic. So, David, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to begin with some numbers. I just stumbled over this. Since the last time I emailed you about this, I discovered a guy named James Cutting, who's a psychologist at Cornell University, who's been studying the evolution of cinema. One thing that he found was the average shot length of English language films has declined from about 12 seconds in 1930 to about 2.5 seconds today. I don't know whether that surprises you or not. I'm guessing it doesn't. Guessing that it doesn't.
All.
Yeah. So
if you've ever tried to watch an old movie with a certain kind of impatient kid, and they keep glancing at their phone because they're not used to staring at a screen for that long without the perspective changing. It's really shocking when you go back. I just watched Taxi Driver with my daughter, Paul Schrader's Taxi Driver, and I was stunned by how slow it seemed. I mean, it was completely entrancing, it's so intense. It moves almost languorously until the violence explodes. You're just wallowing in spiritual dislocation. And I'm glad it worked for me and it worked for my daughter. But I imagine there may be people who are used to multitasking who will be glancing at their phone.
Right. Well, Taxi Driver is actually a movie that you've also discussed at some length, and I think on multiple occasions with my son. And I have a memory of taking my son to the movie Lost in Translation when it came out, based on the recommendation of Rebecca Lobo, of all people. And so he was, he was like a member of his generation. He was 14 or whatever he was, and it was used to certain kinds of movies. And I was terrified all during the movie about what kinds of conversation was going to happen when the credits started to roll. What was he going to say to me? And he surprised me by saying, I kind of like that. He said, nothing happened, but that's really the way that life is. And I went, phew. But I think...
Well, does nothing happen? Does nothing happen? Or does... Look, the opposite... What's the opposite of boredom? The opposite of boredom is absorption, right? So you can be absorbed in, it depends on you, on what you bring to it. You have to commit to it. You don't just sit there and expect it to do everything for you. If you invest the effort in any work of art, it takes energy to make energy. You have to rise to meet it. You have to invest quite a bit if you want to follow Joyce's Ulysses. But the reward is a kind of crazy exhilaration. You're breathing different air. Boredom, I think, comes from passive viewing, multitasking, lack of focus. Anything that absorbs you will not, by definition, be boring.
I do wonder, one thing we were emailing about, and something that I've been thinking a lot about recently too, is if it is a movement, and I'm not really sure it is a movement, but there are people who call it a movement, the movement of slow cinema. This would be maybe epitomized by some of the movies of Kelly Reichardt, but there are a lot of other movies that get called that, where in fact that whole idea of the 2.5 second shot is pushed away in favor of really dwelling on smaller moments and having, God forbid, periods of silence. And I'm wondering, do you think it's kind of a reaction formation against the kind of hyper-caffeinated quality of a lot of mainstream cinema right now?
Yes, and the hyper-caffeinated quality of a lot of life right now. I mean, in AA, they're full of placards, Buddhist placards, and they've got something that says, don't just sit there, do nothing. Doing nothing can be enormously active if you really look at what's going on. On the other hand, there are movies that that I'm of two minds about, that try to sort of simulate the experience of boredom experientially. Critics weirdly picked John Dielman by Chantal Akerman as the greatest movie ever made. And it's like 3.5 hours. A lot of it is a woman chopping vegetables. And you're supposed to feel how weighted down, how constricted she is by the patriarchy, by the expectation she'd be a housewife and a cook and a cleaner and a sex object until she finally explodes. But, I think that Okay, I get that. I would get that in about 10 minutes. They want you to feel the passing of time, tick, 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 so you'll empathize. But a great artist, understands that a lot of art is shortcuts and heightening and teaching us to make imaginative leaps. Chekhov's plays are not boring, although his characters often complain of it, because Chekhov fuses psychology with music. He finds the music of boredom, and he gets what it means when your life has no meaning. And that is extremely absorbing to those of us who considers ourselves Chekhovian.
So I think that's a nice segue, actually, into a person who was your personal mentor and a source of great inspiration for you, and that's the critic Pauline Kael. I think Pauline Kael, to those of us who are a little less sophisticated about it, I thought she had very little patience with things that she found boring, and she actually called 2001 boring. I think you see it a different way, but maybe talk about what Pauline I think maybe a lot of the things you just said were part of the education you got from Pauline Kael, but say a little bit more about that.
I am a Paulette. I am an avowed Paulette. I miss her. She died in 2001. By coincidence.
Yeah, by coincidence.
Which I saw, by the way, at the Cinerama on Farmington Avenue like 3 times, and I had no idea what I was seeing, but it completely psyched me out. That's the thing. Pauline knew that movies like that can, that don't have a lot of exposition, and then go very slowly and have very lofty aims, can be bullying, can be very intimidating. She's often misunderstood. She's accused of Philistinism because there was a point where she made a case for so-called trash in the movies over these lofty, beanbag, slow, symbolic things like Last Year at Marienbad or Hazard Balthazar and so on. She liked Kurosawa, who the Japanese thought of as a Western-style director over, a meditative tableau maker like Ozu, but she was not a lowbrow. Her motor ran very fast, and she saw where a lot of these things were going, and it was nowhere she wanted to go. She felt it was really easy to kind of bully the viewer with that kind of slow pacing. But she loved Satyajit Ray, the great Indian director, who's again had this kind of there was just a fullness to his cinema. You can find fullness in a lot of this stuff, but also let me be fair. I mean, sometimes I'm sometimes I'm bored and impatient, and I shouldn't be, and I wish I were better about it. When I first came to New York, I went to a midnight screening of Tarkovsky's Solaris. It's like 3 hours, and I don't know, but part of me, I think, is still there, and the rest of my life is a hallucination because I think I'm still there in that room, and this has all been a dream, because I've never, ever experienced anything quite so suffocatingly boring. So, but I do think Pauline brought a lot to a movie experience, and I think one antidote to boredom is to put a lot of effort, is to be an active consumer. Passivity, having something else do all the work for you. Having, we have, in a way, we have too much, I don't know, we have too much control. We have, you should submit to something.
Surrender, I think, is
surrender. Surrender.
Yeah, I know you're just getting warmed up here, but the show's over. But David Edelstein, great to hear your voice. Can't wait to see you again soon. America's greatest living film critic. Thanks to everyone who listened today. I know we didn't bore you. There's no way we could have bored you, but if we did, it was probably for a pretty good reason.
I'm sick of all the dips. I'm sick. I'm sick and I go to sleep at night. I'm still sick in the broad daylight 'cause I'm bored.